When the zombie apocalypse came, the lives of thousands of people changed. After all, the dead surrounded people and were encountered at every step. Each meeting with them could be the last. Therefore, a person needs to be ready. Mutants were extremely hardy and strong and could easily catch up with and knock an adult to the ground. The main character was an experienced soldier in the past, so he prepared to meet monsters. His task was to find supplies for his family and survive for their sake. He had to risk his own life, which he did every day. The streets were teeming with mutants, so he used a car he found on the street. But even that was not safe, because the monsters had intelligence and could pursue their prey. He had special equipment that was critical for his survival on the city streets. The man had to wear special armor and equipment that helped and protected him. There were so many zombies on the city streets that any walk for supplies could be the last. He had to break through because that was the only way to escape from the environment. There were really many of them. It was real hell. A person who was not ready would die immediately after the first encounter with a zombie. His car was very badly damaged. The windshield was broken. Stopping in a crowd of mutants meant death. Suddenly, the broken glass could not stand it, and one of the zombies tried to get into his car. The man did not want to die like that, so he started pressing the gas pedal with all his might. For him, it was ordinary everyday life. Such things happened to him all the time, and every day he had to risk his life. But now, he understood that the danger was real. After all, the zombies had overturned the car and locked him inside. The car became a living grave for him, and gradually the zombies began to surround him and climb inside. He couldn't die because it meant the death of his loved ones. He had to do everything possible to survive. It was scary, he screamed. But even a few months ago, he had no idea what awaited him and his family. He had a wife and daughter, and they lived their normal lives like all other people. But everything changed the day when people in military uniforms appeared on the streets of the city. It was announced over a loudspeaker that martial law had been imposed in the city to try to stop a new, dangerous epidemic that posed a serious threat to all of humanity. People had to follow the main news channels to learn about the spread of the infection and possible risks. The main character's wife was very worried about the epidemic because their daughter was still very young. To calm his family, the man promised to do everything possible to change the situation and ease their situation. Even in this difficult time, he tried to joke. The news reports reported that the number of infected people had already increased to several thousand people. From that day on, quarantine was introduced because politicians believed that this was the only way to slow down the spread of the disease. Rumors spread on the internet that it was a zombie virus, and over time, those infected allegedly turned into monsters. However, the professor did not support this idea and categorically rejected such statements. The man also did not believe in turning people into zombies, considering it only a way to scare the population and keep them at home. The main goal now was to earn money and stock up on everything necessary for the quarantine period. That morning, doctors went around the house, conducting a census and identifying the sick. From now on, they were supposed to bring food to all living people every few days, and in case of need, they could be contacted for help. There were almost no people on the streets because everyone tried to avoid danger and stayed at home. For the first time in many years, the main character allowed himself to sleep longer, because now he did not have to get up early and go to work. The supplies that the doctors brought could provide them with food for several weeks, so they did not have to worry about money. The daughter wanted to go out into the yard and play, but the father explained to her that it was too dangerous. They could not take the risk. To distract her, he turned on the TV, which reported that no new cases of infection had been detected in the last 24 hours. This meant that the epidemic had been stopped, and this news brought great joy to the people. The last days in the apartment had been extremely difficult, but suddenly the light went out. After checking the meter, the man realized that something serious had happened. The neighbors also had their electricity cut off, and now they didn't know what to do without it. On the streets, the police tried to calm the angry crowd, assuring them that the outages were temporary and that everything would be restored soon. Hearing this, people began to go outside, because there was no point in staying in their apartments anymore. The police tried to stop them, but in vain. Everyone was convinced that the epidemic was over and the danger had passed. Suddenly, a column of smoke rose a few blocks from their house. It seemed that the fire was huge, and it was difficult to understand what was really happening. To hold people back, the police were already ready to use weapons. But suddenly explosions were heard, and shooting began a few meters away. The sounds became louder and louder. It felt like they were getting closer. It was unclear from which side to expect danger, and the man, trying to protect his family, quickly led everyone back into the apartment. Suddenly, a stranger appeared on the street, running away from someone in panic. A huge crowd of zombies was chasing him, and seeing this, people, along with the police, rushed to flee. But they could not escape. The monsters were too fast and did not know fatigue at all. They caught up with the defenseless and tore them to pieces. Despite the desperate shooting of the police, there were too many monsters, and the bullets did almost no harm. Surrounded by a crowd, everyone was doomed, with no chance of survival. The zombies tore their bodies apart, causing people unbearable pain and torment. Then they began to penetrate the houses, destroying innocent residents on their way. Panic broke out in the city. Civilians found themselves in a death trap, unable to leave their own apartments. The man understood that danger was approaching. Now he had to do everything possible to save his family. His daughter cried in horror. She was extremely scared. They moved away from the balcony. The father quickly began to close all the windows and doors, trying to block any way into the apartment. So that his daughter would not hear the screams of people and the sounds of shooting outside, he put headphones on her. The man tried to convince her that this was all just a game and that what was happening was not real. Only after his words did the girl calm down a little and believe that her father was telling the truth. Then he rushed to the door to make sure that it was locked. But strange sounds were coming from the corridor. It became clear the monsters were already very close, and now their family was in the same danger as everyone else. There were so many of them that they could easily break down the door and get into the apartment. And at that very moment, the monsters began to bang on the front door. The man was seized with panic. If they broke inside, it would be impossible to stop them. He grabbed the phone, hoping to call for help, because this was his only chance to escape. But instead of an answer, he heard a message. During quarantine, calls are prohibited, and if you need help, you should contact another time. In despair, he cried. At that moment, the man realized that they had been deceived all this time. In fact, the situation was much worse than they said, and there were many more infected people. Despite this, he had no right to give up because the life of his family depended on him. Soon, the water was also turned off, and the people found themselves in an even more difficult situation. The main character began to check all the taps, hoping that at least one would be able to get some water. But all his efforts were in vain. Then he hurriedly began to collect the necessary supplies. It seemed that he had a new plan. He decided to use an empty bucket. He began to tightly cover the empty buckets to preserve even the remnants of water that were still inside. This was vital because most likely the water supply would never be restored. Despite everything, he continued to make attempts to call for help, although he understood that he would not get an answer. His wife cried. She had already come to terms with the fact that their family was doomed. Her husband promised her that they would survive, and he would do everything to make it possible. She seemed to believe his words because she simply had no other choice. None of them could have imagined that events would unfold so terribly. They did not even suspect how critical the situation was. It was clear they would have to stay at home for a long time, and the lack of water and food would turn into a real threat to their survival. Therefore, it was necessary to accurately count the remaining provisions and learn to distribute them economically. Fortunately, the last time they managed to buy a large amount of baby cereal, this supply was enough for a long time. Also in the pantry were a few kilos of rice, beans, corn, 2 packs of pasta, and some fast food. There were some vegetables, a few packages of yogurt and rice cakes in the fridge. They even opened the fridge door to collect some water from the condensation. After all, the water reserves were melting, and soon they could disappear completely. First of all, it was necessary to eat those products that spoil quickly and put the rest aside for later. But it was almost impossible to cook food without water. Now they had to figure out how to cook dishes because they could not eat raw rice. And suddenly the man remembered that they still had a reserve. 40 liters of water. It was stored inside the water heater and it could be used. It was enough to open the valve to get the much-needed vital water. After counting, they realized that they actually had about 50 liters of water, which meant that now they would be able to cook real rice. This news gave them joy and, most importantly, hope. They felt how much they loved each other and how grateful they were for their support and presence. But outside the walls of their apartment, everything remained the same horror. Soulless zombies continued to roam the streets. From time to time, screams could be heard from people who risked their lives trying to leave their homes in search of food and supplies. The only desire of each of them was to survive and at least someday return to normal life. They followed one another, and some, out of desperation, dared to take a step to leave their own apartment in search of salvation. Parents did this for the sake of their children, but almost no one could make their way through the crowds of the dead. At that moment, a brave man died. He fell dead right in front of his little son. Most of all, he wanted only one thing: for his child to survive, even if he himself was not destined to. For the boy, this was the end. He was left without support and his closest friend. Time passed and nothing around him changed. In the end, his father's body also fell prey to the infection. And the child, trembling with fear and shedding tears, only watched and prayed that it would turn out to be a terrible dream. But in front of him stood no longer his father, but a soulless creature, in which there was no heart or emotions left. He did not even feel pain. When someone threw a bottle at him, he did not even react. Seeing this, the boy was not only scared, but also felt sorry. Because in front of him was his own father, whom he had already lost forever. Some male neighbors, not realizing the tragedy, tried to perceive everything as fun. They laughed and threw things at the dead, not even thinking that they were once also living people. The poor boy tried to stop them because he couldn't believe that his father was not real. He felt pain and tried to protect him. Because of his scream, the neighbor missed and wasted a valuable bottle, which made him very angry. The boy felt very sorry for his father and asked him not to touch the man with the briefcase. Other people mocked him, claiming that his father was a psychopath or a coward for leaving him alone in the apartment. These words deeply affected the boy and he started crying. There was no more food left in them, and his father had eaten almost nothing in recent days, so the boy decided to go in search of supplies. Despite the complexity of the situation, no one wanted to share food with him. People ignored the poor boy and continued their business. Without hesitation, the men threw bottles at the monsters, getting great pleasure from it. They had fun watching how those bottles hit the heads and the zombies began to get angry. The zombies noticed that the bottles were flying in their direction and were looking for a way to get to the people in the apartment. Then the people stopped and came up with another plan. They lowered a rope and tried to throw it over the head of one of the zombies. After that, they began to pull him. This brought them so much pleasure that they did not even think about the consequences. After all, when they were left without electricity and were forced to sit at home, this was the only way to have fun. It was very interesting to watch the creatures that could not reach them. However, now the zombies have become much more aggressive. They began to create a pyramid, climbing on each other to get to the people. Very soon, they began to climb the walls of the house, and only now, the people realized how much they were wrong. However, now it was too late to change anything. The zombies began to break the metal bars. Because there were too many of them, they quickly managed to do it. Now the people were trapped, surrounded by monsters on all sides. They had no chance to save themselves because the mutants got inside their house. All the people watched what was happening, but no one felt sorry for them because they themselves were to blame for what had happened. Now it became clear that the metal bars were not a reliable protection against monsters. The man tried to collect the remains of water. He did this so that his daughter could drink. They were ready to do everything for their little girl and gave her all the water without even drinking a drop. When they watched their daughter drink for the first time in several days, then they realized that they were truly happy. In addition, the father came up with another way to cheer up the child. He managed to turn off the phone, and now she could enjoy her favorite game. And together they played it, and even such moments were very valuable and happy. The man invented a special generator with which he managed to charge the phone. However, for this it was necessary to turn the handle for a long time, but it was not a big problem. The phone charged very quickly and they could use it. They also constantly watched their daughter sleep and hoped that the next morning she would wake up. They had not drunk water for a long time, but none of them wanted to do it. Their lips were dry and they looked very bad because they had not drunk water, but none of them wanted to do it. But they understood that this could not continue or be permanent, and sooner or later, they would have to drink some water. Therefore, they agreed to do this right now, so as not to expose their own bodies to danger. They each drank a glass of water. Immediately, they felt much better, because it was their first sip in several days. Now, water had a completely different meaning for them. Never before had they thought that it was such a precious resource. The woman began to feel sad again, because sooner or later their supplies would run out and they would have to leave their own home for the sake of survival. However, she quickly calmed down. She did not want her husband to see her in such a state. The husband smiled. He was glad that even in such a situation, his wife was not upset. They tried to joke because it was the only way they could console themselves. Suddenly, the people heard a strange sound. It was coming from the balcony, so they had to check what really happened. Carefully opening the window, they saw a strange note lying in the middle of the balcony. The man carefully approached it and picked up the piece of paper. It was a note from their neighbor who lives opposite them. His child had a fever and needed to find medicine, so he tried to ask other people who were not indifferent. The man could not refuse him because I believe he really needed help. Now they had to come up with a way to give him the medicine. For this, he was going to use a rope because throwing them was very risky. He tied one end of the rope to the box, and the other he wanted to hold in his hands in case of need to pull it. And when everything was ready, he threw it. First, they needed to try to connect the rope between their own dwellings. Everything worked out, and they managed to connect the rope between their own dwellings. Now they could tie the medicines and safely pass them to each other. That's exactly what they did after a while. The man had all the medicines he needed. He wanted to thank people for their help, so in return, he sent them a package. It was water, which was critically needed for survival. He sent a note with it thanking the people for their help. Everyone was happy because it was a very profitable exchange. Very quickly, some people also started using ropes to exchange some necessities, but food and water were not enough for everyone and hard times began. The man had not drunk water since then and continued to endure despite the fact that he was very sick. He needed to find a way to get more water. He turned his attention to an air conditioner that could contain condensate and hoped that this would help him. He needed to make the motor inside the device roll manually, with which he could get the precious person. So, he started to disassemble the air conditioner. He was so sick that he couldn't concentrate and focus his attention. However, he knew very well what he needed to do and tried to find the compressor. Unfortunately, it was sealed and it wasn't as easy to get to as he had initially thought. The man felt even worse because he had spent a lot of effort on it and nothing was working. His eyes started to close and it became clear that he was losing consciousness. His wife came to his aid. She saved him and gave him some water to drink. Realizing this, he became very angry because he didn't even realize how he had drunk so much water at one time. Besides, it was their last bottle and there were no more supplies left. However, she thought that there was no point in saving because he was dying, and if it weren't for this water, she wouldn't have been able to save him. Suddenly, someone knocked on their front door. Because of this, they were very scared, because it seemed to be people. In fact, it was a girl who somehow managed to get to their house. However, they were in no hurry to open the door and didn't want to let her inside. She showed them a bag of food and water that she managed to save and wanted to share with him, because she couldn't get to their apartment earlier because of the huge number of zombies. Delighted, the woman wanted to open the door. However, at the last moment, he stopped her, not allowing her to do so. He tried to calm her down and wanted her to behave quietly and not make any noise. She continued to talk and tried to convince them that she had a lot of water and other resources. However, the man replied that he was not going to open the door. After that, they saw the girl just leave. In fact, the woman could not understand her husband's behavior. However, it was impossible to believe that someone could remain so kind in such a difficult situation. He was convinced that they were trying to deceive them and come up with a way to get inside their house and rob everything. They were very upset about this situation, however, they decided not to open the door to anyone anymore. Suddenly, they heard the voice of their neighbors begging for help. Very quickly, they realized that they had made the right decision, because if they had opened the door, they would have been in her place. The same woman who offered them help was now dragging the victim's body into her home. After that, the suspicious woman returned. She again approached their door and began to threaten with a knife. She promised to return and take revenge. The main character tried to calm his wife and said that her words were a bluff and she was only trying to scare them. They continued to live as before. They only gave their daughter the necessary amount of water that was needed for survival. As before, they did not drink water, therefore their body suffered greatly. However, this time, she received less water than before. The girl wanted more, but now they had to save the liquid. The father tried to explain that she had to be patient until water appeared in their apartment. Then she could drink as much as she wanted. The girl agreed to wait because she knew that her parents did not drink anything at all. Suddenly, several shots and strong blows were heard. The sounds came from the bathroom, and very quickly they realized that it was the neighbors who were trying to destroy the wall that separated their houses. It became clear that it was a woman who was threatening them, and she was trying to find any way to get into their apartment. The husband wanted his wife to take the child, but she wanted to stay to meet him and protect their home. But he couldn't let her or their daughter get hurt, especially since if she stayed, she would only distract him. However, she was afraid for him and that he wouldn't be able to cope on his own. Moreover, their enemies were armed, so she left, leaving him alone. Meanwhile, the husband began to prepare for battle and gathered all the necessary equipment that would be needed during the defense of his own home. He began to prepare, and in order to protect his body, he placed a hard plate. He also wrapped his hand in a large layer of tape. After that, he began to collect other equipment and hid a sharp weapon in his clothes. The hole in the wall became so large that the neighboring apartment was visible. He was very nervous, but continued to wait, not intending to retreat. Then, he took a desperate step. In order to stop the attackers, he used a gas cylinder and lit a flame. He hoped that this would stop them and show that he would not give up so easily. But it had no effect. His body was pierced with a sharp spear that was made by his own hands. Opposite him, he saw a man who was his neighbor. He smiled and promised to kill them in order to take all the supplies. He ran out of gas and could no longer hold him back, so he started climbing into his room. The main character understood that he needed to try to attack first. However, he did not have time to do this and missed a painful blow to the stomach. He was very hurt, but he had to hold on for the sake of saving his own family. He started to fight, despite the severe pain and bleeding, but the enemy managed to catch his hand and block the attack. Now they started to fight each other and everything depended only on physical strength. The main character took a desperate step and tried to strike with his head. It worked, because his opponent lost his balance and the man managed to gain the upper hand. He found himself on top and tried to stab him with his own knife. To do this, he pressed his whole body against him. But he did not notice at all how the same woman who threatened them ended up behind him. Her face was burned because she was injured by the flames. She was hungry, so despite the severe burns, she tried to stab him with a knife. But at the last moment, the hero managed to dodge her blow. By chance, she stabbed her ally's hand and he began to scream in severe pain. Then, the main character again struck a powerful blow to kill her. Now the enemy had no allies left, and besides, he was wounded. The same fate awaited him? Everything was over and the enemies were dead. After the battle, the man felt very bad. His wounds hurt, and he was exhausted. He dropped to the ground to catch his breath. For the first time in his life, he had to kill a person. However, he couldn't relax, and right now, he was going to check what was in their apartment. The priority was water, which he was trying to find. To do this, he needed to go around the entire room and check every shelf. Suddenly, he noticed a strange closet. Opening it, he saw a huge number of human body parts. The smell in the picture made him feel sick. However, then he saw another object that caught his attention. It was an armored box, and it seemed like there might be valuable things inside. There was also a closet there, and he tried to check what was inside. Fortunately, there was water. But he was in no hurry to drink it because it could be poisoned. Enemies couldn't be trusted. In addition, he saw a key on the table. His wife continued to wait for him in another room with her daughter. And when she saw him, she was very happy. He was alive, and besides, he had found water. Jai's wounds were not deep, so they needed to be treated. There was no heavy bleeding, and he felt normal. Now, his daughter Kay could drink the water he managed to find. Despite the fact that his wounds were not serious, Jai was in a lot of pain. His daughter and wife did not leave him because they loved and feared him. His wife sat by his bed for so long that she fell asleep, but when she woke up, she noticed that her husband was no longer lying there. He got dressed and was going to fix the air conditioner so that they would have water. The woman could not understand where he got so much strength to continue working. In the neighbor's room, he found a battery. If he could, he would be able to start the air conditioner. He needed to do everything possible to get condensate and be able to produce enough water. He was very nervous that you tried to do everything right and very carefully so as not to break anything. And when he started the air conditioner, she really started to bathe. All the people were very happy because now they had the opportunity to produce at least a little water, which was so necessary for their survival. The next night, he lay awake, holding the neighbor's key in his hands. The woman noticed this and couldn't understand what he was constantly thinking about and why he was so tense. In fact, he knew about the existence of a small car that belonged to the neighbors. It was parked a few meters from their house, and he could use it. Hearing this, she started crying, trying to stop him. But her father didn't listen to her. He wanted to do everything possible to go in search of supplies and ensure the survival of his family. She cried, but even that didn't stop him. Very soon, they would run out of all their food, and there was only enough water for a few days. They risked dying of hunger or being killed by a zombie attack. He couldn't watch his family slowly die, and something had to be done. Even if it was a small chance of winning, he had to try because he would never see his family get hurt. Now, there were far fewer zombies on the streets of the city, and he hoped he could get to his car and stay alive. But what would happen next? He didn't even know how to drive a car. He didn't have a driver's license. Jai was going to get to the nearest sports supermarket and try to find some food for his family. He hoped he would be able to find water, too. She didn't seem to be thrilled with his ideas, but she understood that it was critical for their survival and agreed. The next day, the protagonist began to prepare for his journey. He put on all the necessary equipment that would protect him. It was very difficult to say goodbye to his family because he risked never seeing them again. Finally, they hugged and he saw his girls start to cry. However, there was no time and he left, having only hope in his heart. He tried to move very quickly and did everything as carefully as possible so as not to attract attention. The events moved to our time. The main character was trapped. As before, there were a lot of zombies on the streets of the city, and they began to surround him. Now he was in real danger because his car started to burn and he could not get out. It seemed that the flames scared the monsters very much and they began to retreat. This gave the man a certain advantage, and after a lot of effort, he finally managed to leave his car. Despite the fact that his clothes were burning, he started moving and tried to escape from them. He realized that they were afraid of the flames because at that moment they could not get close to him. In order to protect himself, he needed to find a safe place, and he started trying to climb the tower. He threw off his burnt clothes and was very lucky not to get serious burns or injuries. After that, he started to run away from the monsters along the power lines. When the flames died down, the zombies started to chase the hero, not giving him the opportunity to break away from them. Now that he was on the other side, he needed to get rid of his pursuers and he started to cut the power lines. Very quickly, a huge number of zombies were on the ground. But even now, he did not stop and continued to climb further. He was lucky because not far from him he saw an open car and hoped that it would start and he would be able to escape on it. Also, there were the keys, and this meant that he had a new chance for salvation. He tried to carefully get closer to the car, after which he was ready to jump to the ground. He did everything so quickly that he was able to climb inside and close himself there. Now he only had to hope that the car ran on gasoline. Despite the danger, he tried to do everything carefully and calmly. He succeeded. Now he had a car again and could continue to escape. The man was moving too fast to avoid getting stuck in the crowd of the dead again. However, he didn't even notice that he wasn't alone in the car. There was just a zombie behind him who was about to bite him. Jai was lucky enough to see him in the rearview mirror, and he braked. The monster flew out through the windshield. After that, he continued to move, right into a huge crowd of zombies. He was forced to give them his own car because he simply had no other choice. If he stopped, he would simply die, and he would no longer have any chance to get out of the environment. Suddenly, he saw a weapon in his cabin. Jai was very happy because he hoped that it worked and there were bullets there. Now he could shoot zombies who managed to get inside his car through the broken glass. There were few bullets, so he tried not to waste them. Due to the huge number of mutants, his car started to skid. He was not an experienced driver, so he could not cope with the steering. Unfortunately, he flew off the bridge and started to fall, and the zombies who continued to pursue him began to jump into the cold water right behind him. Now, his car was in the water and its interior began to flood. The zombies could not swim, so they began to drown, suffocating from lack of oxygen. And when his car sank to a sufficient depth, he held his breath and left the interior. G managed to reach the surface, which was covered with dead bodies of monsters. This was the only safe way, so he did not leave the water. After a while, G became very tired and decided to stop by the pipe to rest. He understood that his strength was running out and decided to stay there for a while. Jai hoped that the place was safe and that they would not be able to get him there. He lay in this state until late at night. Exhausted, he fell asleep and slept like that for several hours. But he had a terrible dream in which his daughter Kori was attacked by mutants. This dream made him wake up. Now he had to keep counting, despite the terrible pain and fatigue he felt. Ahead there was a dark tunnel, but that did not stop him. There were a lot of ugly insects on his way. However, he continued to crawl. Now, he found himself in a sewer where there were a lot of cockroaches and dirt. He couldn't get to the surface because he had no weapons and his pistols were low on ammo, so he decided to move through the sewers. He didn't know if it was safe and only hoped that the mutants wouldn't have time to get to the sewers. In addition, there were many other dangers there because everything around him was trained and could collapse at any moment. From memory, he managed to get to the local store, which was not too far from their house. Jai carefully looked at the street and realized that there were too many mutants. Suddenly, one of them noticed a strange noise. He heard the sound of a hatch. Therefore, the monster began to head towards the source of the noise, trying to find its new victim. And when the danger passed, he was finally able to get to the surface. Jai wanted to go through the back door, but the door was locked. He tried to open it, although it made a lot of noise. To do this, Jai put a lot of effort, but he couldn't do anything. He already thought about giving up, because he was convinced that he was wasting precious time. However, thoughts about his own family did not let him stop. He did everything only for them. At the cost of enormous effort and pain, he succeeded. The door opened and now he could go inside. The store was very dirty and dark. Also, he heard strange sounds, so he decided to arm himself with a metal pipe. In addition, the furniture and doors inside were broken, which meant only one thing: there were monsters there. Carefully and slowly, he entered the room. It was a room with shelves that once held products. But now it was empty. He saw no food or water. He was preceded by other people who were also looking for supplies and were hungry. After carefully examining the entire room, he saw a strange hole in the wall of the store. He did not know where this would lead him, but he decided to check. When he entered the room, he found himself in another room, but the feeling of anxiety did not leave him. Jai was very tense. He tried to move carefully so as not to make noise and not to attract attention. Suddenly, he saw a little girl in front of him, and it seemed that she was standing near a well with water. The man had hope because now he believed that he had finally found a source of water. But when the girl saw him, she was very scared and started to run away. She hid in a hole in the wall, leaving a bucket of water. Carefully, the main character approached him. He could not believe his eyes because now he could drink enough. He was happy because his efforts were not in vain. It was at this moment that the girl ran to her parents. Her mother was cruelly abused. She suffered terrible torment for the survival of her own family. Her daughter was very scared when she saw everything with her own eyes. The fat man got angry when he saw her and tried to hurt the girl. He threatened to feed her to zombies because she didn't listen to him, but her mother always stood up for her. Suddenly, he felt that there was a gun near his head. Now, the fat man was silent. He didn't risk moving because he was afraid that the stranger was a bandit and would shoot him. They all looked at each other. It became very quiet. The fat man tried to explain that he didn't really need trouble and they were all good people. In addition, he explained that he actually loved his child and was just raising her because she didn't listen to him. However, the main character doesn't believe a single word he says. In exchange for his own life, he promised to give him all the food and water they had. Also, when he offered him to eat right now, he wanted to do everything possible to make his own life better. The woman started screaming, trying to warn her husband because he didn't listen to the fat man because he was a traitor and a liar. With his own hands, he killed a lot of people. In addition, he took her own husband and now mocked him. Hearing this, he got very angry and tried to hit her. However, Jai stopped him. He started threatening him with a gun again. Suddenly, the big man grabbed his hand and tried to take away his weapon. In addition, he hit the main character, which made him lose his balance. Great, the advantage was on his side. He started threatening the main character with a gun again, but he did not give in to his provocations. He waited for the right moment, and when he did not, he dealt a strong blow, breaking his head. The dead body of the ugly man fell to the ground. When the woman and her daughter realized that he was dead, they cried. But they were very happy because now we could not be free. Also, she thought that the main character was a criminal and was ready to give anything he asked for, just so that he would not touch her daughter. However, Jai stood silently and watched them cry. He explained that he also had a daughter and he did not even intend to hurt them. In order to calm them down, he hid the weapon and promised not to even touch them. Also, it became known that during the quarantine, there were 57 people in this room and they were the ones who remained alive. Jai could not believe that the fat man was capable of such a thing and killed everyone else. He wanted to know what really happened and why everyone died. However, she could not speak. She just burst into tears. After the zombies appeared, all the people tried to find a source of water, which everyone was so lacking. Her husband was able to get to the water and was ready to share it with all the other people who also needed it. All the people respected him because he became their hero and savior. Also, they wanted to make him the main one among their group of people, and it was he who could give orders and manage all of them. Everyone trusted him, so he was ready to try to do it and take on such responsibility. However, there was another unresolved problem: food, which would also run out very quickly. Therefore, they were going to break through the wall to the store to provide themselves with everything they needed and continue to survive. All the people agreed to do it. Therefore, he began to break through the wall first, showing everyone his example. Of all the people, only the fat man behaved very strangely and suspiciously. He suggested that the man rest and was going to work instead of him. At first, he behaved normally and even helped people. They all became friendly because now they had a common goal for which they worked. People were happy when they were able to get a lot of food and drinks. However, sooner or later, the food would run out, and if they did not save, they would quickly start dying of hunger. He was going to give out food in equal portions every day, and the oldest in their group was to store the food. In addition, they were going to start growing their own plants and tending to the harvest. None of the people took his words seriously. They could not imagine how they could grow their own food. Also, they were scared that they would have to go up to the surface to do so. Now that they had water, they could also plant plants on the roof, but for that, they had to move the soil to the ground floor. If everything worked out, in a few months, they would be able to eat the food they had grown themselves. Everyone was delighted with this idea. Very soon, they began to prepare to plant the crop. First of all, they selected potatoes that were starting to sprout. After the land was tilled and prepared, the women began to plant the plants. They did everything carefully so that each plant would sprout. None of them doubted that they would succeed because they had enough water to water their plants. They just had to wait for the time to come for everything to grow. The people were happy. After a while, some shoots began to sprout. Then, almost all the plants took root and began to grow. Because of the large amount of water they were watered with, they grew very quickly. But one of the men could not help himself. He picked the crop and started to eat it, right from the ground. The chief did not like it, so he wanted to punish him. His behavior disrupted the order and left many others without food. He tried to explain to the man that now he was not just a sprout that could be eaten when it grew up. But the man was so hungry that he was ready to endure beatings, and the chief could not hold back. He beat him severely because of what he had done. When he returned, he met his grandparents. They were waiting for him because they had a very serious conversation. They checked that no one was listening to them, after which they went with him to their room. However, the fat man was watching everything that was happening and saw how Zhang beat the man who wanted to eat. He became very curious and wanted to listen to their conversation and find out what they were really talking about. The old people told him that recently they had been giving people as little food as possible, which is why the riot started. With the amount they had left, there was only enough food for a few days. In fact, there was only enough food left for a month. And in order not to cause panic among the crowd, they lied. Because of this, they found themselves in a critical situation. This meant that they would have to starve for a whole month until the potatoes grew. As soon as the food ran out, everyone would start eating the potatoes that had not had time to ripen. Because of this, everyone would die. They were also worried that a food war might break out and people might commit terrible crimes for food. They hoped that Zhang would be able to persuade the crowd to wait and calm down, and he promised to do so. The fat man heard their entire conversation. After a while, a famine began in the camp. The people refused to work because they did not receive food and had no strength. They felt very bad, and because of the hunger, they could not stand on their feet. Instead, they wanted to force the fat man to work because he, due to his large fat reserves, felt much better. In response, the fat man also mocked them and called them lazy because they refused to work. He also lied to them that he had food, which made them immediately stand up and try to make peace with him. The fat man began to ask them if the men were really that hungry. And then the fat man told everything he had heard from Zhang's conversation. He called the man a traitor because he had deceived his people. He also said that it was Grandma, Grandpa, and Zhang who had eaten their food and lied about having enough. When the men heard this, they wanted revenge. Immediately, they ran to Zhang, but before that, they took more people with them to make sure they had the upper hand. They all started shouting, demanding that they be given their food, which they all needed so much. They considered the old men traitors who had deceived everyone and eaten up all the supplies. Soon, Zhang came to them. Everyone began to tell him about what had happened and accused him of lying. However, Zhang could not believe his ears. He did not expect that the people he had worked so hard for would now start accusing him. However, many of the people were losing consciousness due to hunger. And then, Zhang said that the supplies were much less than they were told at the time, but explained that he just didn't want to cause panic. Everyone started whispering. They seemed to understand. However, the fat man couldn't accept it. He rushed at the man and tried to hit him. In response, Zhang dealt a strong blow that stopped him. Immediately, a fight broke out. All the people were fighting among themselves for the food. The fight was so fierce that people were seriously injured. Zhang ordered everyone to stop because this could not continue. He was saddened to see his once friendly people turn into barbarians who were ready to kill each other for a piece of bread. In order to reconcile them, he allowed the people to take their share of food, but warned them that the consequences would be terrible. After all, they would lose everything, and the harvest, for which everyone had worked so hard, would be destroyed. Because of his words, everyone calmed down, but no one wanted to harvest the food. The next night, all the men gathered on the roof of the building. The fat man tried to persuade them to carry out a coup and defeat Zhang, because he was a thief who stole their food. The fat man believed that Zhang was trying to do everything possible so that the people would simply die of hunger. And instead of slowly dying, they had to go and take their share by force. He wanted to kill everyone who disagreed with him. At that moment, he took out a knife, but the people remained calm. The fat man shouted, calling them cowards. However, in reality, there were not so many men who were ready to side with the fat man. Zhang had many more men, however, the fat man considered them inexperienced and hoped that they would be able to win. And suddenly the first man joined him, who was also hungry and considered Zhang a traitor. Then the next one joined, and gradually, almost all the men who were on the roof sided with him and agreed to fight for food. Suddenly one of them got up, his stomach hurt, so he wanted to go to the toilet. However, the fat man did not let him do this. Instead, he simply stabbed him with his own knife. No one could believe their own eyes and that the fat man was capable of such a step. The body of the dead man was lying on the ground. This was the first victim. Now, everyone had to touch his body in order to show their confidence and readiness for battle. The first volunteer who was ready to do this appeared. He took the fat man's knife and confidently approached his dead body. After that, he stabbed him right in the back. Finally, the fat man was truly pleased that he had managed to attract allies to his side. They started to descend and intended to find the main character and his team, but instead met his daughter. She did not suspect that the men were evil and could hurt her, so she smiled at them and wanted to give them a flower. Seeing her, the fat man was very happy because he understood that he could blackmail Zhang's head. After that, he became very angry and was going to kill the child, even though she was small and could not defend herself. At this moment, Zhang appeared, who ran to her scream. When he saw what had happened, he could not calm down. Despite the fact that he was alone, this did not stop him and he continued to fight them. He managed to hold off the attackers for some time. But because there were many more of them, he was seriously injured. In addition, he killed several of them. The dead bodies of the attackers lay on the ground. Because the leader was much stronger, no one could get close to him, and they were all afraid to die. With his strength and courage, despite his terrible wounds, he managed to stop the attack. At this moment, the fat man was very scared because he understood that Zhang would want him. In order to protect himself, he tried to cover himself with the body of his comrade, because of which he died. After that, he pushed the men away from him. Zhang tried to convince them to stop before it was too late because of his wounds, he could not continue fighting. However, they did not want to stop because they understood that they had a huge advantage when they defeated the strongest. The fat man tried to convince the people that they were on the right path. Therefore, they continued to fight and kill everyone. They managed to destroy a huge number of people and capture everyone who tried to hide, including women, children, and old people. They threw them down to feed the zombies. But that's all that ended there, because after that, he turned people against each other, and they staged a massacre, as a result of which everyone died. Only he managed to escape and stay alive. When the main character heard this story, he was touched. He looked around the room in which they lived and noticed that there were a lot of different tools. This equipment was collected by her dead husband. He believed that people would need it in order to continue to survive and in the future fight against other groups of people like him. The main character chose the most necessary things for himself that he wanted to take with him. After that, he decided to deal with the fat man. The man was unconscious, so he had to tie him up. He wasn't dead, but he had lost consciousness due to a strong blow to the head. After a while, he started to wake up. But when he saw the situation he was in, he got very scared and started to apologize to the man. But the man wasn't going to forgive him after everything he had heard. He started to undress him, taking off all his clothes. After that, he cut him into small pieces. He put one of them in his mouth so that his screams wouldn't be heard. Now, the woman and her daughter could avenge the death of their husband and father. They could do anything to get revenge, even kill him if they wanted to. At that moment, he approached the girl and gave her the metal stick. He believed that this was the right decision because now she could avenge the death of her father. However, he ordered that she not overdo it and accidentally kill him because he could be very useful. The girl agreed and took the weapon from him. She approached her victim and hit him on the head with her strength. Her mother joined her and together they began to beat him. Meanwhile, the main character tried to take as many supplies with him as possible because he believed that this was his loot that he had earned. Also, he wanted to eat, so he tried to eat as much as possible in order to at least restore his strength a little. After that, when he was going to check if his house was visible from this place, he carefully looked at the high-rise buildings, trying to understand if there were any living people left in them. And when he realized that there was no one there, he became very sad. There were no lights in the houses. It only meant that the people there were dead. Also, he looked into his own house, which also had no lights. Because of this, he became very sad and tried to hold back his tears. The girl understood that he was very difficult and offered him water. The man drank the water with joy and thanked her for it. She also asked if he was trying to find his home where his family lived. However, the man replied that his parents, with whom he had lost contact for a long time, were not far from here. He hoped that they might be alive and were waiting for someone to save them. She thought that he was going to save his parents and wanted to go in search of them right now. The man just sighed heavily. The main character was not going to do this because he did not have enough strength and resources to take them with him. He also told about his daughter, who really wanted water and was waiting for his return, so when he was about to leave, suddenly, the little girl screamed. This saved the main character's life because he noticed her mother trying to attack him. At that moment, he managed to dodge and grab her by the neck. Jai did not understand why she did this, because he saved her and saved her from terrible torment. Therefore, Jie began to threaten her with a knife and was also going to kill her. At the last moment, he thought about his own girl. He felt sorry to leave the child without parents. Therefore, this made him stop and change his mind. He let go of the woman, but did not take his eyes off her. Now he could no longer understand who he should be more afraid of, zombies or people. The poor woman was exhausted and lowered her weapon. She regretted her actions and started crying. Now that her husband, who had always tried to help everyone, had died, she had lost trust in people and could not believe that she had been saved for nothing. Also, she felt very weak and could not continue to protect her daughter. Jai felt sorry for her, but he could not change anything. After all, now all people were suffering and going through difficult trials. Human kindness was now becoming a weakness, and it was necessary to think only about their own survival. However, he believed that they still had the right to choose and could choose their own path for themselves. He admitted that from the very beginning he wanted to kill them both, but the choice to believe them almost killed him. He understood that if people did not change, they would continue to kill each other, and I would not be able to win for anything, and the apocalypse would never end. Perhaps her dead husband thought the same, and that was why he was dead now. Perhaps he paid for his own kindness and the fact that he trusted people. Hearing these words, the woman began to cry. She remembered all the moments that connected her with her lover. Suddenly, a shot rang out. This sound was very close, and the main character rushed to the window to check what was really happening. When he turned the binoculars, he saw a terrible picture. It would be about two groups of people who were on neighboring houses. It seemed that both groups had run out of supplies and now they were trying to kill each other. One of them was much stronger because they had armor and weapons. The bravest and strongest of the men were going to storm the neighboring building. They managed to break into the crowd and start destroying everyone in their path. The war was very cruel and neither side was ready to surrender. A lot of people were dying, and those who were the least lucky fell down, where they were torn apart by zombies. The battle was very cruel and there was a terrible scream and poor people who gave their lives for a ghostly hope. The strongest had firearms and ammunition. Therefore, they shot each other from the stands and did not risk their own lives. In addition, people managed to invent powerful weapons, which became fire cocktails. They threw them into a crowd of people, from which they received terrible burns. But even this did not stop many of them. They continued to fight despite the terrible injuries, because the survival of the entire crowd depended on each of them. Suddenly, the main character saw his own parents fighting on one of the sides. He could not believe his own eyes, because he saw how hard it was for his father and realized that they were alive. Now he realized that his parents were in real danger, because the Borgs managed to go over to their side and throw a net over them. After that, they were in danger and the enemies began to beat them with their feet and other objects. Jai cried, but he had no way to change anything and somehow help them. He watched as his parents and other unfortunate people were beaten to death, and I wanted to throw them down until they were devoured by mutants. Also, the head of the enemy camp came to their side and was going to kill all those who were not going to obey him. The people who managed to be taken prisoner were going to be transported to the other side. In fact, they wanted to use them as slaves who would work for the enemy camp. His parents were one of them, and Ji saw their bodies being carried inside the house. The woman realized that these were his parents. They were engaged in the transformation of people, so they were allowed to stay alive. And then, the woman realized that most likely they would be prepared, because they knew a lot of important information about other people and the routes where there were the fewest mutants. Jai asked his father to be patient. He was going to come to his aid and free him from captivity. But the woman heard about his plan, could not believe how he would be able to cope with armed and strong enemies on his own. However, he did not know whether he would be able to win or whether he would be able to survive at all. But if he did not do this, then his parents would definitely die. That now she realized that he was actually very similar to her husband and spoke the same way as him. Therefore, she did not doubt that he would succeed and believed in his victory. For this, the man sent to the garage in order to choose the best weapon for himself and be ready for battle. He managed to find a huge amount of various equipment. He carefully examined all the objects that came across his path. Then he started tinkering, trying to assemble the best and most powerful equipment for himself. He used absolutely everything that came to his hands. After some time, he managed to assemble a weapon that could shoot nails. Now he wanted to test its effectiveness. He realized that with its help, it was easy to test the human body and inflict serious injuries. He continued to prepare, and now he needed to try to make some armor for himself. At the same time, he remembered pictures from his childhood when he was a little boy. During his school years, he was often bullied and did not have enough physical strength to defend himself. However, his father always supported him and made him stand up for himself. He knew that his son was not respected and beaten. He had weak hands, so when he tried to make a man out of him, the father wanted his son to finally become braver and start defending himself. To do this, he needed to take revenge on his enemies and make them stop touching him. His father kept telling him that he needed to be responsible and brave. He could lose the battle, but he needed to repay the same and never give up. The boy didn't take his words seriously, but he knew that he was telling the truth. He decided to listen to his advice and do everything as he said. After he returned home, even more new wounds and bruises appeared on his body. The father immediately noticed that something had happened to his son. When his mother saw what he looked like, she was very scared. However, Ji didn't say anything. He didn't want his parents to know about what had happened. But the father noticed the bruises on his hands and realized that he had finally been able to defend himself. He smiled imperceptibly and was actually very proud of his son. On the first day, he and his father were called to school. He was taken to the principal's office where he was forced to apologize to the person he had beaten. Even though he was not to blame for what had happened and was only defending himself, no one listened to him. The father of his abuser was very rich and allowed himself to call the main character names. But Ji's father supported his son in any situation and considered him right. Now, a quarrel began between the men and they risked a fight right in the school. Even the fact that there were significantly more opponents did not scare the man, and he was ready to take revenge on all of them for the sake of his son. He was alone against the whole crowd and had to defend himself. However, he very easily dealt with all of them and remained unharmed. Now, he was able to take revenge on his own son and became a real pride and example for him. This brought them very close, and the boy remained forever grateful to his father for changing his life. Meanwhile, he continued to tinker and tried to develop deadly weapons. There was a huge number of different tools in the room from which he tried to develop different things. One of these was a rocket launcher, which he filled with a lot of debris and sharp nails. He believed that this weapon would be truly dangerous against a huge crowd of people. Suddenly, a woman approached him. She gave him her husband's jacket because they had the same size of clothes. The main character thanked her for the gift and asked if he had any plan. But at first, he needed to get to the neighboring house, and then when he didn't know what to do, now he climbed onto the roof. He took the fat man with him. He was going to use him as bait. Therefore, he cold-bloodedly pushed him off the roof of the house. Now, the fat man was doomed. Terrible torment and a slow death awaited him. Taking advantage of the moment, he tried to get to the neighboring house. The mutants began to tear his body into small pieces. In all this time, he remained alive but could not do anything. Jai watched how the mutants reacted to the food and tried to move very quickly and quietly. There was a lot of different equipment on him, so it was difficult for him. But still, having made a huge amount of effort, he managed to overcome a long distance and end up on the same house. All the time, a woman was watching him with her daughter. She did not believe that he would be able to defeat a huge crowd of people alone, and the worst thing was that his family was waiting for him at home. The girl believed that the main character would survive and win. Tears appeared in the woman's eyes because she also wanted this. Now that he had filled up on the neighboring house, he was ready to enter the room. It was the place where his parents had been taken. Despite the fact that he was very scared, there was no going back. He gathered himself and with all his might jumped into the room. But surprisingly, it was very quiet there. When he looked around the entire room, he saw nothing at all. Even when he calmed down, he calmly and quietly began to move on. Instead, there was a huge amount of blood in the room. Its trail stretched to some kind of open door, and he was going to move along it, trying to find his own family. On his way, he saw a huge number of corpses and human bodies that were scattered throughout the house. Many of them died of hunger or other diseases that developed in a closed room. He understood that he needed to be as careful as possible and not attract anyone. First of all, he wanted to know in which direction he needed to move and where to look for his enemies. So he began to listen. Now he had an understanding of which direction the screams of people were coming from, and he went in search of them. He had to move through the bloody trail that stretched through the entire house. Trying not to attract attention and not to make noise, Jai carefully started climbing the stairs. He saw a lot of bloodstains on the walls and floor. Despite the fact that he was in a house with many enemies, he was not afraid, and for the sake of saving his own family, he stopped. Suddenly, he saw a light in one of the rooms opposite him. Looking in there, he saw a man sitting with his back to him and did not see the main character. He managed to overhear his conversation. That evening, there was to be a feast in the main house, lots of alcohol and food. They discussed the details of their operation and the war they had managed to win. Because they had won, they started drinking and forgot that they were on guard duty. This was a good chance for the main character, and he took advantage of it. When the men lost their vigilance, he attacked them and started killing them one by one. In a panic, they tried to fight him off, but nothing worked. They were all dead. He didn't give anyone a chance to escape and was ruthless. Suddenly, the man heard a strange sound and saw a glass of blood on the shelf. Very soon, he realized that there were still people alive inside. The sound came from the closet where the criminal could be hiding. Therefore, he wanted to force the enemy to come out of it, keeping him at gunpoint. The criminal was a child and did not want to suffer, so he asked to just kill him. But Ji was in no hurry. He wanted to find out where his parents were and whether they were even alive. There was a bridge on the roof of the building that connected this house with the main building. He did not believe the boy, so he wanted to kill him. However, he asked how old he really was. As it turned out, he was only 14 years old. And this made the man stop. He could not so easily take the life of a child, even though he was his enemy. Jai did not kill him. Instead, he tied the boy tightly. He also covered his mouth so that he would not start screaming and calling for help. Jai left the little one in the same room and went to save his parents. Now he needed to get to the main building that connected these houses. To do this, he needed to go out onto the roof again. There were a lot of enemies there, so he had to do everything very quickly and carefully. But when he got there, he didn't see anyone. Now he tried to find the very bridge the boy had spoken of. As it turned out, it was very close, so the man noticed him right away. But when he was about to go to the next house, he stopped because he heard a strange sound behind him. The man turned sharply to make sure that he was not in danger. However, he saw a man behind him. He was scared and crying. The unknown wanted to be spared and was scared. Jai was going to shoot him to end his suffering. However, the unknown stopped him. He had children, and he wanted them to stay alive. But when he looked into the face of the main character, he changed to recognize him. Jai did not understand anything, who this man really was. Suddenly, he took out a weapon and tried to wound the main character. But he did not succeed because Ji was ready for this and expected that the enemy would try to deceive him. He shot him right in the face and took his life in cold blood. After that, his dead body flew down, where the mutants would start to tear him apart. Jai just calmly watched what was happening. When the danger passed, he began to move along the bridge, and he heard his enemy screaming, who even after being shot in the face remained alive, and now his body was being torn to pieces. He calmly moved on. However, he noticed that there were a lot of mutants on the street. The monsters were hungry and very quickly ate the bodies of all the people who were below. Now he managed to get to the neighboring house, just Ji was inside. In front of him, he saw two people. There was music playing and everyone was drinking. Therefore, they simply did not pay attention to him, and Jai passed by them, not drawing attention to himself. This time he was lucky, but he had to be very careful and try to behave inconspicuously. Inside, there was a real celebration. Heavy music was playing, and everyone was dancing and having fun. They were the winners in the war, so they wanted to celebrate. Also, in the middle of the hall sat the chief, surrounded by food and women. He was the main organizer of this celebration. Also, inside, there were many prisoners who were going to be tortured in front of everyone. In order to stay alive and become members of their clan, the poor people had to eat pieces of human flesh. The crowd liked it, so they started screaming. Some tried to do it, but they failed. Then, they were faced with a cruel punishment. They were simply killed. People simply had no choice. They were forced to do what they were told. Otherwise, they would simply be killed, and their bodies would be thrown to the monsters.